My name's Matt Gay, and I work with Fergal Balance at Adam and Eve, and we're the creative directors on John Lewis and Waitrose. I've worked at Adam and Eve since 2009 when we first won the John Lewis account. And tonight I'm going to talk about the beginner and John Lewis Christmas advertising and his campaigns. To the public, they become a much-loved part of Christmas. To Adland, they've become the most written about, dissected, awarded, and often criticised in the UK. And to the agency creative department, it's the biggest and most exciting brief of the year. It's the brief all the teams want to work on, and it's the brief they all want to crack. It's also one of those briefs that make you sick to the stomach. You know, we work with some of the top directors in advertising: Kim Gehrig, Michel Gondry, Seb Edwards, Oscar Hudson, Mark Malloy, and the genius Dougal Wilson, who has shot at least 5 of the spots himself. There's a lot of pressure on it, and you certainly don't want to be the creative team that does a turkey. Now, it's important at this point to stress the massive role that John Lewis have played in the success of the campaign, for their belief in creativity and their commitment to bravery when probably more rational decisions would have made more sense at the time. This approach has helped cement a productive partnership over the past decade and more. And it's at the beginning of that decade that I want to start, as it helps to set the backdrop of this campaign. And there are several parallels between 2011 and 2022. By 2011, we had produced 2 beautiful spots for John Lewis Christmas. Several of the John Lewis Christmas ingredients already existed in these films, like the re-recorded track, for instance. But both were vignette-based and focused heavily on half a dozen products. There was no story. Research showed us that people weren't emotionally as engaged in these films as we had hoped. So in a brave move, John Lewis agreed to move away from overtly selling products to something a bit more magical. The ad wouldn't be about selling products, it would be about the feeling of giving. Ben Priest, the founder of Adam and Eve, came to us and said, "Forget the products, forget the vignettes. I just want a wonderful narrative that encapsulates the feeling of giving at Christmas." The result was A Long Wait, directed by Dougal Wilson. It featured a small boy who couldn't wait to give his Christmas gift on Christmas morning. It was a roaring success with the public. Over the next decade, the campaign became bigger and more successful. The bar was set higher each time. Disney-esque illustrated animation, wonderful CGI characters, and animals bouncing on trampolines. Elton John made an appearance, and there was even a spaceship crashed from space. Parodies were made, merchandise was sold in the hundreds of thousands, and over the course of 10 years, 1.2 billion was generated in incremental sales. So, to 2022. Against this backdrop, we started to look at what we was going to do for this Christmas. But we had 2 factors to consider. First, we was in the middle of a rebrand for John Lewis and already in a production to launch the new line for All Life's Moments. The ad would play out in September 2002. It focused on authentic, real-life moments. And whilst there was some John Lewis ingredients, you knew it was a John Lewis film, it was a million miles away from dragons and spaceships, and John Lewis understandably wanted some consistency. So fantasy was out. The second factor to consider was by the beginning of 2002, the world was going to shit. We needed to acknowledge what was happening in the real world and read the room. And as tempting as it was, we felt we couldn't just knock out another blockbuster when UK families would be struggling come Christmas. It was the right thing to do, but also scary off the back of so much success? How could we retain what we knew the public loved, but not seem completely out of touch with the real world? About this time, Martin Beverley, our head of strategy, started to quote Sir Nigel Bogle, who would say, "How do you move a brand on without moving it off?" Our answer was to change the brief from thoughtful gifting to thoughtful gestures. And just like they had done in 2011, John Lewis did something extremely brave. We wouldn't create any new characters, sell any plush toys or any kind of merchandise that had made them lots of money in the past. But rather, as a purpose-led brand, they decided they wanted to pursue good acts rather than overtly selling products. We would use the unique platform John Lewis has at Christmas to encourage good acts. Now, the Christmas ad takes an entire year to create, and here's a basic timeline of how it works. So in Jan, we'll write the brief the teams. Fed to April, create, development, and debate, and I can tell you there's a lot of debate. Director treatments and pre-production from May to July. August, we will shoot. September to October is post-production. And then at the end of October, we argue over music. November, we sit there, fingers crossed, hoping it lands. And then come to this time of year, we just actually try and enjoy our own Christmases. But the unique briefing of this is normally in our agency, you would brief a team, one brief. But with John Lewis Christmas, we briefed the entire department together. About 50 creatives squashed in a room, and everyone, doesn't matter how senior you are, how junior, has a crack at the brief. The room is always deadly silent. No one will say anything or ask a question as to give advantage or spark an idea for the team sitting next to you. There are certain things that we want to see in the scripts when we get them back, certain John Lewis ingredients. We want a single narrative, like the stories that we know have been so successful, a surprising ending, and something that moves you. And by this, I don't necessarily mean moves you to tears. It could, move you to laughter. But mostly, we're looking for something that we haven't seen before. And each year, give or take, we get hundreds of scripts back, probably about 600 to 700. And after several rounds, we got several great scripts and presented them to JL. However, a couple of things bothered us. Despite the parameters we had set ourselves, some of the script was still epic in scale. They would have been 3 minutes extravaganzas, and we were seduced by these wonderful stories and got overly excited. So we kept having to rein ourselves in, as I said before, knowing that families would be struggling at Christmas, spending millions and millions on production just didn't seem right. The other thing that bothered us is that John Lewis, and it bothered John Lewis as well, was that John Lewis seemed to lack a role in any of these early scripts we wrote. What was our purpose? There needed to be a reason for us to create an ad with a purpose-led story. It was at this stage that John Lewis told us they were launching an initiative to support young people from care. They're building Happier Futures program in partnership with Who Cares Scotland and Action for Children. They wanted this to be the purpose for the film. So now we had a solid purpose, but a purpose in a really complex and emotional space. How do you make an ad as good as everything we've done before, but hit the right tone and read the room? Several weeks went by, and we had nothing we were excited by, and panic started to set in. Finally, we got a script from Zander Hart, Edward Usher, Rich McGran, and Andy Clough. It was really simple. Actually, this is the original script. Then it was called The Arrival. Back then, it's the beginner now. But it was really simple. Of all the ideas presented to us, this story really sang out. It was heartfelt, quietly heroic, and most importantly, handled the subject matter with respect. The POV of this man in his 40s learning how to skateboard, regardless of his advancing years, public embarrassment, and aching joints, to have the smallest chance of making a foster child feel more at home was perfect. It had the handwriting of past ads, single narrative, and surprising ending. And what we liked most about the rug pull reveal was with the ending was that the rug pull revealed the purpose we were championing. It felt joyful as well as moving, And it was a story of a grown man, not a child, where we had obviously been previously over the last decade. We immediately got it over to JL, and they loved it as well, and we had our script. The pre-production on the film was fairly straightforward, but casting was critical. The young actress, although only playing several seconds, had to land the nervous energy and honesty of the ending. We also had to be sensitive and not cast any negative stereotypes. The dad had to perform levity without being too slapstick. We didn't want him to be a good skater either, as we wanted this progression to feel real. And of course, we wanted him to be able to act well enough to land the emotion at the end of the ad. Thankfully, the pair that we cast were brilliant. So as we started to look at the ending, we went into storyboard phase after getting our director, and we started to scrutinize the ending. There was no two ways about it. We had to get this moment right. It was important that the moment felt authentic to what happens in real life. We couldn't sugarcoat it, and we couldn't imply that this child's life was now perfect. John Lewis had established an advisory group of experts in the field, many of them whom themselves were care experienced, to ensure we were addressing the real needs of this community. They reviewed the ending and advised us on how this interaction would play out in real life. It was invaluable to us. On a more personal note, my sister is a foster parent, and I took her through the storyboards as well. She told me of her experiences, how she behaved, and how children reacted when they came to her house to stay. As with the panel, it was priceless information. So music, the last hurdle. With the film shot and edited, we came to music. And music, as I said before, causes unbelievable amount of arguments. Predominantly in the past, the tracks have been re-records, very warm and heartfelt, and in some cases, even describe the narrative of the ad itself. So we had a desire this year to change that up, and we didn't really want to do a re-record at all. And early on, we initially wanted something very, very different, very joyful, something that was a nod towards skateboarding and the 90s, the idea being that this was something our dad would have listened to when he was young. We started the search before the shoot and listened to hundreds of tracks. We got really excited about some pop rock tracks and some new school hip hop tracks. But once we saw the edit and played these tracks to picture, we realized we were completely and utterly wrong. We faced a few issues. Firstly, the bold tracks were overpowering the visuals and getting in the way of the story. Secondly, and most importantly, the tracks were completely insensitive to the ending. Even though the plan was to drop out the lyrics and pare back the music slightly, it didn't work, and we knew the tone was way, way off. Not to mention lacking any emotional punch at all. We then did another search for music that was more sensitive to the ending, only for the reverse to happen. Whilst these new tracks worked well for the ending, they were overtly emotional for what the viewer was seeing. And we felt they were quite leading, like as if it was signposting that something emotional was about to happen. The film was almost had two halves in that aspect, and we were really struggling to solve it. There were tracks that were okay, but nothing that made you feel anything. I think we always, when we look at these films and that music comes in, we know, you just feel something immediately, and we know we had landed it, and we just couldn't get it right. And again, not for the first time, panic started to set in. Then finally, Ed and Zander believed they had something interesting and shared it with us. And when I opened the link, it was buffering, and I saw this image. And to be honest with you, I thought that was winding me up. This is the John Lewis Christmas ad after all. But as I played it, I got really excited. This cover of All the Small Things. There was a nod to skating culture. It felt like it worked with the humour up front as our dad struggles. It then becomes sparse and gentle towards the end and had the potential to be sensitive to the ending. Anthony Moore at Factory cut it to picture and played it to us. And to everyone's great relief, it just worked brilliantly. It made me smile, and to be honest, it made me want to cry. I think as much out of exhaustion as anything else at the time. But we knew we had it. We played it to John Lewis, and they absolutely loved it as well. So November 10th, 2022, we played out with bated breath. And thankfully, the response was brilliant. Not only from the press and the public, but from lots of people who came from the care system themselves. And for me, hearing these heartfelt responses is what really mattered the most, knowing that we had got the tone right and read the room. So before I play the film, I just wanted to sort of acknowledge some of our partners in the process of this. It's kind of over the last decade become a bit of a family with the people that work tirelessly on this. So Anthony Moore, the sound engineer at Factory and his team there, Abby Leyland and Abby Leyland Music, Ludo and his team at 1920, and the guys at Workpost, and the lads Zander, Ed, Rich and Andy, who tenaciously kept going on a very, very complex and emotional brief. So that's me, guys. Thank you for coming out in these Arctic conditions to listen to the talks tonight, and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.